Good evening. Your votes have been counted and the SNP remains the largest party in local government in Scotland. And they've made progress since 2012, taking the lead in more local authorities. But the Conservatives have made some big gains, largely at the expense of Labour. Labour has lost control of Glasgow, a council it's held since 1980, where the Tories picked up some unexpected seats. We'll have a detailed rundown of the results in a moment, but first here's our political editor, Brian Taylor.
Democracy in transit, ballot boxes delivered by helicopter and every other means of transport. But in politics, it's shoe leather that counts. In this case, flamboyant Union Jack shoes worn by Megan Gallagher, who won in North Lanarkshire for the Tories.
If a Conservative can win in Motherwell West, then I think we can win across the board.
And win they did, recording gains everywhere, a blue tidal unionist advance. And not just in posh areas. They won in a ward which includes Paisley's Fergusley Park, the most deprived area in Scotland. The party's leader said success was due to local campaigning, underpinned by Scotland-wide opposition to independence.
So much of our bandwidth and time is spent arguing about the Constitution that we're not doing the jobs that people want us to do to improve their quality of life. And our very clear message at this election was each and every Conservative that you elect, and we've now got dozens more than were there before, will make sure that it's local services that come first, not constitutional division.
By contrast, Labour slumped badly. In Clackmannanshire, the SNP held on as the largest minority. Tories up 4 seats, Labour down 3. Former Labour council leader Dave Clark thinks his party's in bits and pieces.
The people of Clackmannanshire have spoken. With humility, the Labour Party has heard what they said.
Certainly Kezia Dugdale has listened, but she warned against internal division.
I'm not interested in any sort of blame game here. We have a general election that's just a matter of weeks away. I'm focused on that. I'm going to get my trainers on and go out there and campaign for a Labour government. It's what I've always wanted. I think it's what the vast majority of people in the country want.
A question of balance. In Aberdeen, the SNP gained seats to take over as the biggest party. But the Tories gained more to push Labour into third. Labour's finance convener Willie Young lost his seat. But in Dundee, which voted firmly for independence in the referendum, the SNP lost ground and overall control. Their leader was jubilant at overtaking Labour in Glasgow, leaving the SNP the biggest party in Scotland's 4 biggest cities, but without overall control.
This is a clear and emphatic victory for the SNP. It means we've got councillors and council groups across the country able to protect local services. But it's also a great launch pad for the general election. I think apart from the result overall, I'm here right now in my home city of Glasgow, where we've just ended 40 years of Labour control of Glasgow City Council. Historic is often an overused word, but I think it's fairly apt to describe the result here in Glasgow today.
The Liberal Democrats mostly held steady but took comfort from progress in Westminster target areas.
We've made real progress. 52% in one of the wards in Edinburgh West, and that's been replicated right across Scotland in places where we're contending to win next month.
Scotland has spoken. Council power broking begins now.
A proclamation for the declaring of the calling of a new Parliament.
But the Westminster election due next month has already been proclaimed.
And we'll hear more from Brian shortly on that forthcoming general election. Right now, though, we can take a look at some of the council results in a bit more detail. Here's our local government correspondent, Jamie McIver.
Thanks very much, Sally. Well, make no mistake, this election was won by the SNP. They won more councillors across Scotland than anyone else, but only one political party made big gains overall, and that was the Conservatives. In terms of councillors, they are now the second party of local government in Scotland, pushing Labour into third place. And when you look at individual results, you get a sense of how the Conservatives have made progress in areas where they had little or no representation before. Let's take a look at a few in detail. Here's Clackmannanshire. There was 1 Tory councillor before, now there are 5. Over to Renfrewshire, from 1 Conservative to 8. And Fife, from 3 Conservatives to 15. In all those cases, the Conservative gains are principally at the expense of Labour. But where will power actually lie in our council chambers? Well, there are now no councils where a single national political party has automatic control, so coalitions will need to be formed or deals done to prop up minority administrations. The SNP are clearly the biggest group in 16 councils and the Conservatives in 6, Labour in just 3. But you can't presume the biggest party will always lead the administration. So tonight we know how Scotland voted, we know which councillors were elected, but now deals will need to be struck and it'll often take a while for it to become clear just who will be running your local services.
Thanks very much there, Jamie. Now, as Jamie was saying, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party picked up an extra 167 council seats across the country as Labour fell back. Well, we can cross to Edinburgh now, and our political correspondent Nick Eardley. Nick, very much the story of a Conservative revival.
Yeah, well, Sally, the big story here in Edinburgh tonight is for the first time the SNP are the biggest group on the council. That's quite a remarkable feat when you're thinking back in 2003, they didn't have a single councillor in this city. But like as we've seen across Scotland today, the Conservatives have made massive gains. They've overtaken Labour, who until today had been the biggest group on the council, to take second place. I've been looking at the fortunes of the Scottish Conservatives. Ruth Davidson meets her new councillors. Some arrived this morning pessimistic. Tonight, they go home elected officials. Across the country, the party picked up votes in areas where they've seldom made an impact before.
We were able to put, for the first time, in some places for many decades, and in some of the results we've had today, the first time ever, Scottish Conservative representatives working hard in every community in Scotland.
The party now believes shy Tories are out and proud, giving it increased hope ahead of the general election.
You will see a renewed effort from the Scottish Conservatives. You think this was a good campaign? You wait until you see the next 5 weeks. We will be pounding the pavements. It's the Scottish Conservatives that can lead the fight back against the SNP. We're the only party that's strong enough to do it.
A shock gain in Paisley's Fergusley Park among the results. Out on the streets.
Very surprised at that. Very surprised.
What do you think of that? Oh, not very good. I was shocked that they actually got it, but yeah, I'm glad.
Senior Tories believe they're increasingly winning votes from other parties, that those opposed to the SNP are now backing them. The Nationalist response.
The Tories tried to turn this into a referendum on whether there should be a second independence referendum. They've failed on that because the SNP have come out on top. I think the story of the day, I was going to say the night rather, the day across the United Kingdom is that Scotland is the only place where the Tories have been resoundingly beaten.
But what do the Conservatives' gains mean for the other unionist parties?
It's very clear that people have been viewing it through the national prism, through the constitutional prism, and the Tories have picked up from that. But I think there's also some things for Labour. We've gained from that in some places.
The Lib Dems are pleased in areas they've been targeting, winning strong votes in wards making up places like Edinburgh West.
That's really significant for the general election going forward because we will be targeting that seat from the SNP. Lots of pro-UK tactical voting will help us over the line in that election as well.
The SNP may be the biggest party tonight, but the Conservatives' result is hugely important. 20 years after the party was wiped out at the 1997 election, the Scottish Tories are back. Nick Eardley reporting Scotland, Edinburgh.
One of the most symbolic results is Labour's loss of overall control in Glasgow, Scotland's largest local authority and a traditional Labour stronghold. Over to our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr, who's at the City Chambers in Glasgow. Andrew.
Yes, Sally, SNP supporters are basking in their victory in the Glasgow sunlight this evening. The day the dear green place turned SNP yellow. Nicola Sturgeon calling this an historic occasion, ending 4 decades of Labour control here at the City Chambers. Labour say they're not too despondent, saying the SNP haven't done as well as some have predicted. Although for the Conservatives, though, some significant and unusual gains, winning seats in places like the Carlton and Chettleston. Not a bad night for the Greens either. Perhaps some people will now be looking to them to see if they might be willing coalition partners with the SNP. My colleague Glenn Campbell has the full Glasgow story.
This is what the power shift in Glasgow looks like. Nicola Sturgeon's SNP have finished as the largest party here and look set to form the next administration, ending decades of Labour control. But the SNP has fallen short of an outright majority.
Let's not underplay the significance of the SNP victory. The largest party, the first time we've been the largest party in this city, and Labour vote has utterly collapsed. As a force, they are finished.
Would you expect the SNP to form the next administration here in Glasgow?
The SNP will certainly form the next administration, being the largest party.
Glasgow Council's been under continuous Labour control since 1980, and the Labour voting tradition in this city stretches back decades more.
Of course we're disappointed, but I think the challenge for us is recognising that the politics of 2014 referendum has changed the political landscape in Scotland. That's been a challenge for us as a Labour Party. If you want to see an end to the politics of grievance and anger, then the politics of the Labour Party around solidarity, equality and fairness is the way to go forward.
In the Shettleston area, Labour lost 2 council seats, one to the SNP and for the first time ever, one to the Conservatives.
Oh, goodness sake, it must be off their head. You must have put the wrong number down. I used to be Labour, aye.
So what made you change?
They're kind of ineffective now, unfortunately.
This 20-year-old student is Shettleston's new Tory councillor. So how does he think he made the breakthrough?
Ruth Davidson has been able to show that the Conservative Party isn't just a bunch of rich toffs. It's people like me who grew up in the East End, who came from a working class background, who are just trying to make the best of their life and say to people, do you know what, it's this party that stands up for aspiration and giving everybody the potential in life, and that's what the Conservative Party is all about.
Are there still no-go areas for Tories in Scotland?
I've just been elected in Shettleston. I think you can say there's none no-go areas for the Conservatives in Scotland.
The Greens have also picked up seats in Glasgow.
People were fed up. People were fed up with not being listened to, with being taken for granted, especially in the East End where I am. And people were ready for a party that would listen to their concerns and work with them to make change. And that's why I think we got elected.
The SNP might need Green backing to form a new administration, because although they've made history by winning here, the SNP's not won as big as they did at the Holyrood and Westminster elections. Glenn Campbell reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Well, let's go to the northeast now. In Aberdeen, the Conservatives made the biggest gains. The SNP picked up another 3 seats, but they don't have an overall majority on Aberdeen City Council. Rebecca Curran is there for us tonight. Rebecca.
Yes, Sally, behind me, Marshall Square, the development that caused so much controversy for the previous Aberdeen Labour-led administration, and possibly one of the reasons they saw such big losses today. They are no longer the biggest party here. That's the SNP, followed by the Conservatives, who made huge gains. But the SNP say they expect to form an administration, and they'll be speaking to other parties in the coming days, as will the Conservatives. But for Labour, one of the most high-profile casualties was former City Council finance convener Willie Young, who lost his Bridge of Don seat, and his campaign not helped by the ongoing row over public funds being used on his on his father's land. As for Aberdeenshire Council, the lead party there is now the Conservatives, but followed very closely by the SNP. But don't expect a coalition deal there, though. That's already been ruled out. So both parties will be looking for potential political partners in the days to come.
Thanks very much, Rebecca Curran there in Aberdeen. Well, let's get Brian Taylor's expert eye on the big picture now in Scotland. Winners and losers, Brian. Let's start with the winners today.
The SNP are evident winners. They have won this election in Scotland. Boundary changes mean that notionally they're 7 seats, a fractional 7 seats down across Scotland as a whole, but in terms of absolute numbers, they have more councillors than they had in 2012. They have more votes than any other party. They are the biggest party in 16 of the councils and tied for the lead in 3 others. They have outpolled any other party in Scotland. Also, though, one must look at the Conservative Party. The SNP have won, but the Conservatives have made some quite remarkable gains. Gains everywhere, no slippage at all for the Conservatives, admittedly from fairly low base in some points, but they have made huge gains. To misquote the author of Alice in Wonderland, both have won and both must have prizes.
And the losers?
The losers are the Labour Party. This is a desperate day for them. They have lost the councils where they were in control. They have lost seats. They have lost votes. They have lost voting share. They have lost clout. Their leader, as you heard in the report that I did earlier, says it's time to get the trainers on and go out and fight for the UK general election. It is not the time, she says, to be considering the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, or perhaps presumably herself. Now, of course, all the other parties will be out there fighting for every possible vote in the UK general election as well. Footwear optional.
And what comfort can the Liberal Democrats take today?
They've held steady, mostly, but the steady is from a base that in some cases was one councillor, no councillors. They've dropped in some areas as well. The point they are drawing attention to is not the local elections themselves, but they're saying that in terms of pointers to the UK general election, they believe they have made gains in areas where they are hopeful in Westminster. But the gainers, the big gainers, are the Conservatives, the big winners are the SNP.
And Brian, we'll talk later about just what we can extrapolate or can't from today's results to the UK general election.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we have to be cautious about that as well.
Thanks very much. Brian Taylor for now. Back to Brian now for a final word. Looking ahead now to the general election, what does today tell us or perhaps not tell us?
Let's put in the caveats. First of all, the UK general election is, of course, an extremely different contest from local elections in Scotland and indeed the local elections in England and Wales, where the Tories have made significant gains. But it is and there will be a different type of turnout, one presumes, and also there is a month to go before those elections happen and before people go to the polls. But if it's a question of momentum, then there is momentum with the SNP taking the lead in half of Scotland's councils, with a shared lead in 3 others. There is undoubtedly a momentum for the Conservatives, making gains in areas where they haven't registered for decades. The party that would appear to have slipped back in terms of momentum is the Labour Party. They have registered losses throughout Scotland. They have lost control of key councils. It looks bad for them, but they are adamant that they can turn it around with a different form of campaign, arguing, for example, that they are second to the SNP in the UK seats that are on offer, and that on that basis they can, if you like, trump the Conservative Party as the unionist opposition to the SNP.
But how much was this about, you know, how effectively bins are going to be collected and so on, and how much was it about Brexit and independence?
For some it would have been about local services, and that's quite right. I mean, these councils are in charge of millions of pounds of money, as well as bin collection. They're currently in charge of education, and they're in charge of planning, which is a function that's generally forgotten, but it's absolutely critical. But politics at the moment is in ferment. It's in a position of complete change and turmoil. And I think throughout England it would have been Brexit, in Scotland as well to some extent, particularly in England. Labour Party not making an offer on that, perhaps not offering the leadership that was seen to be desirous by the voters. In Scotland, I think independence was more to the fore, rather the question of a referendum. I think the Conservatives have managed to arrogate to themselves. They've managed to corral the unionist vote, as they did relatively successfully at the Holyrood elections in 2016. They've managed to say, you want to stand up against the idea. If you're sick of the notion of a second referendum, then go for us. The SNP have managed to contest that successfully by holding on as the largest party, and indeed entrenching the position as the largest party in terms of the councils where they held control. The one who is squeezed out from that mix is the Labour Party. Liberal Democrats, as I said earlier, holding relatively steady.
OK. Brian Taylor, thank you very much indeed. Just a last quick reminder of today's local election results. The SNP remains the largest party in local government in Scotland following the council elections. But the Conservatives have made some big gains, largely at the expense of Labour. Labour's lost control of Glasgow, a council it's held since 1980, where the Tories picked up some unexpected seats. And that is Reporting Scotland. I'll be back with the headlines at 8 o'clock and the late bulletin as usual at 10:30.